Hi there, my name is Hannah Gannon, and today I'm going to be discussing another treatment for cancer, and that is with fluorouracil. So to begin, I'm just going to go over how it is metabolized once it enters the body. So to start off with, I just wanted to kind of say that fluorouracil, or it's also called 5-FU, and it's actually a uracil analog. So what does that mean? So as you can see kind of from the structure, this is the 5-FU, and it very, very much so closely resembles that structure of uracil as well. For those who may not know, uracil is a building block in RNA. It also closely resembles thymine, which is a crucial component and building block of DNA. So, and this is really just important to kind of keep in mind when discussing the overall mechanism behind how this specific drug works here. So, like I said, it is a uracil analog. It does have a fluorine atom, which you can see at C5. Now, this medication is typically given intravenously, and so as soon as it's given, it rapidly enters the human's cells, and it does so in a way that very much so closely resembles that of uracil. And as soon as it enters, it's actually converted into different active metabolites. And so I thought that that was pretty fascinating because in this way, it's capable of becoming very potent because you're able to create these different metabolites and almost have a compounding effect because of that. And so there are several specific metabolites that I did want to discuss. The first one is fluorouridine triphosphate, or FUTP. This is going to be incorporated into RNA rather than uridine triphosphate, which is typically incorporated into RNA, and so this just kind of like takes the place of that. Another metabolite is going to be FDUTP, which stands for fluorodeoxy deoxyuridine triphosphate, and that's being incorporated into DNA rather than DTTP. And then lastly, FDUMP is actually going to inhibit the activity of what's called TS in the ternary complex, and that's something that we'll go over a little bit later. So overall, the metabolite FUTP is actually going to alter RNA processing and the overall function, whereas FDUTP and FDUMP are going to cause direct DNA damage. And all these processes can actually affect RNA as well as DNA and cause cell death or apoptosis as a result. One thing I did kind of want to go over is just the central, dogma of molecular biology. A lot of times you'll hear like DNA makes RNA, which makes protein, and a lot of times that's just important to keep in mind because if you're damaging like the DNA or RNA, that in turn is going to result by affecting everything kind of downstream from that. So if you're affecting DNA, you're going to affect the RNA as well as the protein. If you're affecting the RNA, you're definitely going to affect the proteins as a result. And so that's something that I think is kind of important to keep in mind here. So next we're going to just talk about how actually before I move on, I did just want to say, so because of these metabolites, that's what's going to result in the potent effect through which 5-FU affects the different cancer cells. So going forward, the inhibition of RNA synthesis is a huge part of what 5-FU does in the cell. So 5-FU or fluorouracil is categorized as what's called an antimetabolite. So what does this mean? It is going to be incorporated into cellular metabolism and prevent these cells from unable to divide, which, as you can see, that's probably something that would be really important, is preventing specifically cancer cells from dividing. And so it really targets cell cycle specific cells, and so those cells that are undergoing mitosis and rapidly dividing, those will definitely be targets when using 5-FU. Now, fluorouracil interferes with both DNA and RNA synthesis, and almost mimics the building block that's necessary for the synthesis. And so there's different building blocks that make up DNA and RNA. Most of them are very similar in structure. And so it actually mimics the building blocks like I showed in the previous slide. And so because of that, it's going to be incorporated instead of or misincorporated into, let's say, RNA or DNA, and it will take the place of either uracil or thymine. And it does so because it is a pyrimidine analog. And so as it's incorporated, let's say, into RNA, so you incorporate 5-FU into RNA, and there's many studies out there that have kind of proven or given evidence that suggests that the RNA-based effects play a significant role in the cytotoxicity, which results from 5-FU. And so that's really important to kind of keep in mind overall, because the DNA and RNA is not able to function properly because of the 5-FU. It leads to, it prevents the cancer cell from making these really vital proteins that are necessary for cell function and also cell division. And so as a result of it, the cancer cell can no longer survive and ends up undergoing cell death. So overall, fluorouracil functions by stopping or slowing the growth of cancer cells in the body, and it does this by mimicking either uracil or thymine when you're incorporating these subunits into a growing DNA or RNA strand. Now, there are three specific cytoactivity, or the cytoactivity of 5-FU comes in three different ways, and so I just kind of wanted to quickly and briefly discuss these. And so the first one is that it increases the levels of retroviral elements. Secondly, it does reduce the synthesis of ribosomes. And the third thing that it does is that it inhibits the nuclear RNA surveillance pathway. And so these three things are a huge reason as to how the cytoactivity or the cytotoxic activity of 5-FU is able to play out and generally, and as a result, result in cell death here for those cancer cells. As well as, unfortunately, a lot of times you can't obviously target specific cancer cells, so any types of cells that are going to be rapidly dividing are going to be targeted in this manner here. And lastly, I just wanted to go over the mechanism here. I did want to show this. I'm not going to discuss all these different products, but I think that this just paints a really great picture as to just like the details of the whole mechanism. As you can see here, these are the different metabolites that we had discussed earlier, so it's kind of just fun to see how everything works together and makes the effect that it should in the cancer cells. So in terms of the mechanism, like we said, 5-FU interferes with the nucleoside metabolism, and it's incorporated into RNA or DNA, and as a result leads to cytotoxicity and cell death as a result. Now, the first thing that's going to happen when 5-FU enters the cell is it's going to be converted into what's called FDUMP. Now, this creates a stable complex with TS, like I said earlier, and TS stands for thymidylate synthase, and this is an enzyme. And so, it's going to create this complex with TS, and what it does as a result is that it inhibits what's called deoxythymidine monophosphate, or DTMP, production. Now, why does this matter? So because it prevents or inhibits DTMP production, this is really crucial because DTMP is essential for both DNA replication and repair, and and obviously if you're deleting it, it's going to result in cytotoxicity. So another thing that I wanted to point out as well is just that 5-FU also disrupts post-translational modification of tRNAs and also affects protein complexes as well as snRNA. So something that I think is really just a key to mention here is just how it really targets different, stages that are ultimately necessary for cell functioning and as well as cell division here. So let me see here if there's anything else. Yeah, so hopefully having that little, hopefully having this chart kind of helped put everything together here. These are my references, and then these are my sources for the pictures. So just to kind of sum it up, 5-FU is a cancer medication that is widely used in combination with others, and it really targets cells that are specifically dividing in a cell. It is a pyrimidine analog, so it's going to be incorporated into both DNA and RNA, and as a result, eventually it's going to result in cytotoxicity and cell death here because the cell is unable to make vital proteins and function as it typically should. So thank you for watching my video and have a wonderful night.